Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hi, Jason. Hi, JC.
Hey,
Hello.
morning.
Good to see you both again. Welcome to Disasters Deconstructed live stream. We're really excited to be here again. And actually, I'm going to start slightly differently. I've got a little surprise slash present for
Oh no.
for
Okay,
JC and
go on.
Jason. I want to start this live stream today with a very short story from Eduardo Galeano's Mirrors. It's
Hello.
called Lost and Found.
Hi, hello. Welcome to
The 20th century, which was born proclaiming peace and justice, died bathed in blood. It passed on a world much more unjust than the one it inherited. The 21st century, which also arrived heralding peace and justice, is following in its predecessor's footsteps. In my childhood, I was convinced that everything that went astray on Earth ended up on the moon. But the astronauts found no sign of dangerous dreams or broken promises or hopes betrayed. If not on the moon, where might they be? Perhaps they were never misplaced. Perhaps they're here, hiding here on Earth, waiting. And as you know, today is the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. And I just thought that Eduardo Galeano summarizes our hopes and broken dreams and promises so well in this short piece. And this is what we're going to talk about today. And what could be better than marking the International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction than with the relaunch of Radix and the celebration of its 20 years. Many of us over the years have been inspired by the discussions and debates on Radix's listserv. And of course, many of us used resources collected over the years on the website. Today, we have some amazing guests for you. The people who I don't think need much of introduction. So we have Ben Wisner, Maureen Fordham, Bob Alexander, or Barefoot Bob, as many of us know him, Rohit Jigyasu, and Mayforth Luneta, and from whom you will hear shortly. We asked them to reflect on their personal and professional journey in disaster studies since the launch of Radix 20 years ago. And as you've already figured out, JC is joining us as a co-host again. Exciting. So thanks, JC, for staying up. It's midnight in Auckland, but JC likes doing his night shifts. We figured.
no,
So there you go.
no worries. Thanks for having me again. And be careful, I'm getting used to it. So I'm gonna soon ask for my face on the small drawing on the top left of my screen.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Be careful.
We love
Just
sharing
kidding.
our
Please
pain.
don't do it. Please don't do it. Just kidding.
So as always, if you have any questions to our speakers, post them through the stream. Jason and I are monitoring our social media, and we will definitely make time for the conversation in the end of the discussion. Jason, over to you.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a talk to Tom, our artist. He can definitely sketch up something, JC.
Please don't. Please don't.
Okay, so we are so pleased to be hosting this event on Disasters Deconstructed. As many of you will know, the Radix listserv has been sort of a touchstone for Ksenia and me and many of us as disaster scholars over the past 20 years. And the community of critical and engaged people is just really unique. And so for me, it's definitely an honor to publicly recognize this today and thank all of those who have contributed in the previous decades. So I'd like to say a little bit about Radix for those of you who may be tuning in and hearing about the group for the first time. Radix was established by Ben Wisner and Maureen Fordham, from whom we will hear in a few minutes, in 2001, stimulated by witnessing yet more major disasters in the preceding decade. They were inspired to act by those in Gujarat, India, and El Salvador in the first 2 months of 2001. And the original website and its companion mailing list were created and curated by Alberto Delgado Perez and were designed as collaborative and open spaces to share contents that could help, and comments, I suppose, that could help to develop radical disaster scholarship and practice. Radix is a radical group because it's concerned with both root causes of disaster and structural actions to prevent disasters from the bottom up and the top down. Radix is non-sectarian, but by no means apolitical, and argues that disasters are fundamentally about power distribution. Preventing disasters, therefore, requires political actions. So over the past 2 decades, Radix has evolved into a dynamic collective of people from around the world, and it continues to inspire an entirely new generation of disaster scholars to be more critical and explore radical pathways for understanding and preventing disasters. So today is such an exciting day because we're going to share the relaunched website with you, which is online now. JC will talk about this as well as some other developments in a minute. But there's one more thing that we would like your input on that we've just been discussing this morning again. So when you see the website, you'll notice that we don't have a logo for Radix, but we would like to create one. So we'd invite anyone who's artistically inclined to join a competition and send us your ideas for the logo. And JC has offered to send a prize of his forthcoming book, The Invention of Disaster, to the person who designs our logo. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to our now quite well-established Disaster Deconstructed co-host, JC Gaillard, to talk more about the relaunch of Radix.
Okay, thanks, Jason. That was kind of an ambush. No, but that's all good. Thanks for that. And hi everyone. I mean, super glad to be here tonight for me for this important occasion, I think. And Radix had a similar formative influence on me back. I think in 2002, 2003, when I was in the Philippines, and when I was, teaching and researching at the University of the Philippines, and when I discovered Radix as a fantastic community and as a source of information, inspiration, and motivation as well to do research and to challenge the status quo when it comes to understanding and reducing the risk of disasters. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to be here to indeed relaunch the Radix website. So we've worked hard over the past few weeks to sort of revamp the Radix website without losing its ethos and the wealth of materials that were on the original website. So it's still meant and designed for being a hub and a go-to place, as Ben told me earlier today, a go-to place for whoever is interested in studying disasters to share and to learn about the radical approach to understanding disasters. Jason, I'm not sure if we could show the new website on screen. Fantastic, thank you so very much. So it's been live since this morning, New Zealand time, and it's still in the making. I mean, it's not a finished product in any way. We want the website to be permanently updating and permanently changing in the spirit of this hub for dialogue and for learning and for sharing about disasters. So you will see a blog tab on the top right where we have already uploaded a few blogs that we have cross-referenced from different sources and from our partners, whether it's the GRIP project or the African Center for Disaster Studies and a few other sources. We have as well a news tab where we have different items and events being announced, including this one here that sees us together. So for these two things, the blog and the events, I mean, we are reaching out to you all who are watching for some material. So if you feel like you have something to share, whether it's a short piece, whether it's a blog you've published somewhere else, whether it's an announcement for an event, for a publication, for something happening in your neighborhood that's relevant to Radix and that would help us in terms of brainstorming, in learning, in sharing about disasters, please feel free to reach out to any of us by email. Send us some materials, and we will be super happy to upload these onto the website as soon as we can. Now, there's as well a references tab where you will find different archives, including the original Radix archives, where all the materials that were on the original website have been stored, and everything is accessible through the different themes that featured on the original website. So that's all still there. And we have a few other things that you will check out by yourself. The main thing I would like to introduce today, and which is the second launch of the day after the actual website, is this accord, this disaster studies accord, which is a big thing for us, I guess. So we, I mean, if you're a regular of the Disasters Deconstructed podcast and live streams, you're surely aware of the Disaster Studies Manifesto that we circulated 2.5 years ago. And following this manifesto that many of you have signed, I'm sure, and we are super grateful. We have more than 500 people who have signed the manifesto now. Following this document, some of us came up with a call for what we then called a code of conduct. And my friend Laurie Peak would remind me that I need to mention the Nature paper where we issued that call a couple of years ago. And we were calling for researchers to come together and try to think of how we could improve our practice of research to make it more fair, insightful, grounded, just for everyone, researchers, those who we work with in the field, and practitioners as well. And this call received overwhelming support from all disciplines, from all regions of the world. But at the same time, it got a bit misunderstood by some as a call for a rigid set of principles or a list of prescriptive bullet points that we usually associate with the code of conduct. So we've worked hard over the past few months to try to work on a document that wouldn't give this kind of prescriptive impression, because that was antithetical with what we meant by code of conduct in the first place. And Xenia, in fact, came up with this word accord, which is, I think, very appropriate for what we have here. So what we have here and what that we launch now is actually a series of questions. And there's no answers to these questions. So it's going to be up to all of us to ask ourselves these questions before we actually, I would say, think about doing research anywhere, anytime. So there's nothing prescriptive in there, just about asking ourselves, what do we want to do? Why do we want to do it? Who's going to do what? At the benefit of whom? And how we're going to do this research. So there's a sort of ontological and epistemological underpinning motivation there. So it's all about how we understand the world, how we try to get to know about the world, and for the benefit of whom. So you will see, I'm not sure if you can scroll down a little bit, Jason. So it's building upon the manifesto, but if it's fine, I mean, some people who have signed the accord already, and we've got a fantastic roster of 100 signatories, most of them being early career researchers who have joined with some of us mid-career researchers and Maureen and Ben as our mentors, to think about these questions, rephrase them, try to make them as open as possible. And so you will see at the bottom that you can sign. So it's probably a bit more straightforward and probably easier than for the manifesto that's hosted by a petition website. So here you can just put your name down, your email address in the boxes down there. Here, and we will keep an eye on the spreadsheet which is associated to this voting thing, and we will add your name to the list of signatories as soon as we can. So feel free to join and to sign the accord if you feel like this is something appropriate and that may inform your own research wherever you're in the world, and whoever you are in terms of career stage and in terms of discipline, in terms of focus for your research. I think that's all for me. I'll give the floor back to Ksenia.
And I'll give the floor back to Jason. We're just gonna pass on the floor.
This
Jason.
is what happens when you rely on unprofessional hosts, right?
We'll train you. No.
Right, exactly. I just wanted to mention as well before we go on that we do have a new Twitter account for Radix, which is going to be a collaborative effort. So members of Radix will be taking control of that account each week and posting updates. So the account is Disasters Radix. If any of you are on Twitter and want to check it out, please do so. And maybe you can hold.
May I add one more point?
Yes, you have
one more point.
I'm going to load up the song. Go ahead.
I forgot something. Just if you wish to translate the accord in your own language, please feel free to do so. We had, I think, 7 or 8 languages, and I know there's a Nepalese version in the pipeline for the manifesto. If you want to translate the accord in your own language, please feel free to do so. Send it over to us, and we will upload the translated version onto the website as well. The more versions, the more languages, the more people we can reach out to, the better.
For sure. Yeah, thank you, JC. And just to get us kind of all in the mood for the discussion, but also to reflect a little bit more on the accord, Barefoot Bob has actually written a song about it, which is amazing. So the only people who have heard the song are the 3 of us on the screen, and well, Barefoot Bob, obviously. So we're really excited to share it with you now. Enjoy. It's coming.
So I'm also excited to share it, but I'm working out exactly how to. So maybe we can move on for a minute and then come back to the song, because
sure. Okay, so that'll be a little intervention then, or a little pause, intermission, right? That's the correct word. Once we start talking. Well, okay, so we have amazing guests today, and we have invited our guests to give us a kind of short reflection about their personal and professional journey in disaster studies. And the first guest I want to invite to join us today is Professor Maureen Fordham. Maureen is a professor of gender and disaster resilience. She is Center Director of the IRDR Center for Gender and Disaster at University College London. Maureen was a founding member of the Gender and Disaster Network in 1997. I'm sure you're all following the network. If you're not, please join. And of course, she is a co-founder with Ben Wisner of Radix in 2001. Maureen has been researching hazards and disasters since 1988 with a focus on gender and intersectionality, community-based disaster risk reduction, resilience, capacities, and vulnerabilities, focusing particularly on the inclusion of a range of social groups, and especially women and children. And currently, Maureen is focusing her research on issues of decoloniality and gender-responsive infrastructure. And for me personally, it's been an absolute pleasure and a lot of excitement to work with you, Maureen, on GRIP project. I'm learning from you constantly, and thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And well, this is rather an honor to be the first person speaking. I hope that my voice will hold out, because I've had a cold this week. So if I start croaking, you'll know why. So the question was, what does before I say that, actually, what's funny is, because we work on a visual medium, we work on the internet, and it was all about the website and the email list. We often didn't get to say the words. So for me, Radix is Radix. It's not Radix, it's Radix. So it's always funny for me when I hear people say Radix, because I just think of radish. Anyway, that aside, so the question was, what does Radix mean to you? And my first sort of flippant answer that came into mind was, actually, it means 6 weeks of slog to get a website up and running from scratch, because actually it wasn't Alberto who did the website, it was me. So in those days, you could actually you could set up a website. Well, you can still do it now, but you can set it up. There's nothing more than a simple text editor and HTML tags, and that's what we did. Because after going through, again, watching a series of, happened to be earthquakes at the time, El Salvador on the 13th of January, 13th of February, Gujarat, India on 26th of January. We'd been exchanging emails, and Ben asked me if I would like to write something with him about this, because, again, the usual feelings of anger and almost despair at seeing the same things happening again and again. I said, I don't actually have time to write a paper, Ben, but what I could do was set up a website where we could gather this kind of evidence and critical analyses, exposing the root causes of disaster. So I suggested we could call it Radix, Latin for root, and it then took off and took over my life solidly for the next 6 weeks. That was the beginnings of it for me, and it just bloomed and blossomed. I mean, you'll hear Ben's thoughts about all of this later, but Ben's energy and the amount of work he could just turn out 24/7 was extraordinary. So that really was the beginning of Radix. And to me, in terms of kind of the meaning of it, it meant then, and it still means now, a platform for radical voices to move from the margins to the center. So instead of being the lone radical voice amongst the dominance of technocratic neoliberalism, Radix was all about radical and grounded solutions and analyses and discourse. So it was a space to provide different answers to that question, what's wrong with this picture? So whenever I saw disaster images, disaster discussions, I seemed to be seeing a different picture to the dominant one. I saw a lot at that time about hazard science, but I rarely saw anything about power, about politics, especially gender politics, about risk creation. I saw plenty of examples of marginalized social groups, marginalized people, marginalized along race, ethnicity, class, gender, and other lines, being portrayed typically as a problem, as victims, as passive. as in need of education from technical experts in order for them to act rationally and move from hazardous areas. What I wasn't seeing were those same marginalized people being portrayed as active agents, as having power and control over their lives. Neither did I see or hear about their context and about their history. Yeah, I knew that if you speak directly with those same marginalized social groups, they'll tell you about the history of their relationships to land, to property, to relations of power. They'll tell you about the organizing they do in the face of quite often official neglect. Neglect sounds too passive, you know, it's more an active placing in harm's way. So Radix became this site then for the exchange of these radical ideas, rejecting the status quo and the burying of uncomfortable truths. It maintained its commitment to radical ideas through times, especially after 9/11, when the term radical had been appropriated and when in fact to use it was likely to attract the attention of the secret services. And I hope they enjoyed the discussions that were going on the Radix list. Going forward, I see a stronger movement now more generally actually towards democratization of voices, increasingly an increasing urgency for explicit, more decolonial and often feminist practices and relationships between ourselves and the people in locations of risk with whom we engage in different ways. And you know, JC has introduced the new Radix, so we stopped updating the original Radix website in about 2017, but you know, that was okay because the email discussion list was where most exchanges were taking place. But it just lurked there in the background. Yes, it was an archive and a repository, but there was never enough time to keep actively managing that. And now there is. So now we've got Radix brought back, Radix Redux, and Radix with a new future, which I think is just, you know, fantastic. And I'm really happy that it's moved on. And that's my thoughts about Radix. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Maureen, for kicking us off there with your reflections. And again, it's just such a pleasure to have you with us this morning. I think that I have figured out the technical side of this, so I'm going to try to share this song with you all. Bear with me for 1 second. Ben, you were telling us, you know, saying why we're using all these new platforms and stuff, and I'm tending to agree with you at this very moment. And I can't get the platform to work for me. Okay, I'm going to figure it out when I go off screen again. What I want to do now is to introduce our second guest for this event, Rohit Jigyasu. We're so pleased to have you with us here today, Rohit. Rohit is a conservation architect and risk management professional from India, currently working at ICCROM as project manager on urban heritage, climate change, and disaster risk management. Rohit served as UNESCO Chairholder Professor at the Institute for Disaster Mitigation of Urban Cultural Heritage at Ritsumeikan University, Kyoto, Japan. And he was instrumental there in developing and teaching an international training course on disaster risk management of cultural heritage. He was the elected president of ICOMOS India from 2014 to 2018 and president of their International Scientific Committee on Risk Preparedness, ICORP, from 2010 to 2019. Rohit served as elected member of the executive committee of ICOMOS since 2011 and was its vice president from 2017 to 2020. Before joining this organization, Rohit was working with several national and international organizations such as UNESCO, UNISDR, Getty Conservation Institute, and World Bank in consultancy, research, and training on disaster risk management of cultural heritage. So thanks so much for being with us, Rohit. I'm really looking forward to hearing some of your Radix reflections. Sorry, Maureen.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jason. It's an honor for me to be here, especially to relaunch and celebrate 20 years of Radix. So I'll give my own personal thoughts on how I got involved with Radix in its initial years. And it all begins with the Gujarat earthquake, where I came in as part of a interdisciplinary team that was created to make a reconnaissance visit and find out what are the real challenges there. So I was actually not supposed to be there. In fact, I was a doctoral student in Norway at Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And what happened was that I was doing my regular research and, in fact, very busy with my new kid who was just born, just actually on the day of the earthquake. And my professor actually was supposed to join this team. And for some reason, he couldn't join. And then he asked me to go and join this team of experts. So, which were going to do this visit to Gujarat after the Gujarat earthquake and make a report on what the situation is. And so that's how I came there. And I met this extraordinary group of researchers, practitioners. Being a heritage professional, I was not really so much in contact with the world outside my own professional domain. And that's when I actually met Maureen. And I met several other very excellent professionals who actually became good friends and the ones whom I worked with in the future as well. So I still remember that when I was there at the field and I met Maureen, I think Maureen was expecting a tall, she told just before we launched also that she was expecting a tall Norwegian professor there. And it was not Norwegian, but it was a doctoral student, a young student there. But what we also found, and where we bounded together, was that there was this huge team, but there were very few people who were really talking about non-technical issues. So there were all kind of professionals and researchers and academics who were talking about what technology to use, how better to put it back in, in for recovery and reconstruction. So we had all kind of what kind of infrastructure is needed. So we had all these top-notch people, but we found ourselves a little bit in minority, and we kind of started to complain and talk to each other, and then we slowly kind of started to understand that there is a lot more that needs to be done. And that's the time when actually Maureen was also thinking about setting up Radix. And then when we, then after Maureen went back and she set up Radix, of course, I was in touch with them. And I suddenly found that I had a platform to share what I have been researching on, where at that moment, at least I found that there were not so many takers for the issues which are more connected with society, the more connected with culture. And I found that here is a platform where I can actually share my ideas not just as an academic, as a researcher, but as somebody who is concerned about these issues. And that's when I remember posting my one of the papers that I had just written as a reflection of this, and I called it, by the way, at that moment, From Natural to Cultural Disaster. I mean, that was the theme of that paper that I had posted on Radix in those initial days. And then suddenly I found that there were quite a few other interesting papers that I had to, because I was still doing my PhD, so I could start referring to them and I could actually really enrich my research. And another thing which happened was that what I posted, because those were the initial days of internet. I mean, it was not so well, people were not really referring so much to the internet for all this kind of articles and research. So I just found that there was a kind of critique to what I had written, and somebody had read it on Radix and then replied back to me, and that person was actually one of the decision makers who was responsible for reconstruction, in one of the previous earthquakes in India, and was also going to be responsible for Gujarat earthquake. So I suddenly found in Radix a voice for myself and a channel for me to hear about others, and also a platform for me to have a dialogue. And then it slowly kind of picked up. And one most important thing which I also would mention is that it also made me kind of get connected to disaster professionals who were not from the heritage side. In fact, at that moment, probably I was the only one who was speaking about heritage or cultural heritage as such. So it kind of provided me that kind of interface where I was no longer a cultural heritage professional working, speaking to my own fraternity, but I had this exchange beyond my, my professional kind of domain. And that kind of really was a starting point for me, frankly, to make more efforts towards mainstreaming culture or cultural heritage in larger disaster risk management thinking and an approach. And over the years, in fact, I in fact started to work together with some of those people I had met through Radix, virtually first, and then probably we met later in person as well. And I also remember Teddy Bowen, who was also one of the experts who was there in the Gujarat mission. In fact, came to me. He went through one of the papers that I had posted on Radix, and he said, "Would you like to write a paper with me? Because I'm also concerned about the same issues." And he was an engineer from Indonesia, and he said, "Nobody wants to talk about the socio-cultural issues which are connected to technology. I'm an engineer, but I'm very concerned about these social issues which have to be somehow looked at along with engineering kind of solutions." And we wrote a paper together where so what I wanted to say here was that it also provided, as a researcher, it provided me an opportunity to collaborate with other researchers, get a kind of a confidence that actually there is a meaningful role that I can play as somebody coming from the heritage field in the larger disaster risk management sector. And that kind of began that whole long journey, which I have been continuing since the birth of Radix, and have kind of branched into so many areas, and I feel like part of this larger fraternity who are there for the common cause. And so we work together on issues which are of concern to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much, Rohit, for sharing this experience. And it's interesting because this is how I got to learn about your work and about you. And I just checked my files, and I downloaded a whole bunch of your papers from the Radix website in 2004. And I remember reading those papers on the Gujarat earthquake and resettlement that informed my own work back then. I think Jason is now ready to play the song, so I will leave him
I'm gonna
to
try
launch
and
it.
see if
Yeah.
see if we can hear it. I've tried to work around. Let's see if this happens. Tell me if you can hear it, JC.
Not yet, but I can see it coming on the screen. It doesn't seem to be playing. Okay, maybe we should move on and introduce our next panelist, who is Mayforth Luneta, who is the Deputy Director of the Center for Disaster Preparedness in the Philippines, and I have the privilege to be part of the CDP family as well. So I know Mayforth, and I have had privilege to do some field work with you, Mayforth, to learn from you a lot, from your expertise, from your passion in the field, and yeah, I'm very grateful, and I'm super happy to have you here with us today. So Mayforth, for those who don't know, her trained as a community development practitioner at the University of the Philippines, and then eventually at the Adventist University of the Philippines, and eventually started to work for the Center for Disaster Preparedness, which is, for those who don't know, the NGO probably, and I'm kind of preaching for my own parish here, but probably the leading local NGO in the Philippines when it comes to DRR, and one of the most influential worldwide for sure when it comes to be creative and pioneering, and I believe taking on the ideas of Radix on the ground in the practical space to inform how we actually reduce disaster risk on the ground. So Mayforth, we're super happy to have you, and we're very much looking forward to learning from you. Sige na.
Sige na. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be invited here. And as JC was saying, I'm more of the community person. Our organization has a vision of having safe, disaster resilient communities. And so all our mission and interventions are focused on how the communities will be resilient. And Radix, well, I've been receiving emails from colleagues, friends, and mentors since I think 2008 and even earlier, from Ben and also from Marla Petal. I think the cross with the Provention Web mailing list, and then introducing the blog and also the Radix discussions. And now, as maybe what would be useful in this sharing is that uh, it will be more interesting as I look at the website now. It's quite very interesting, and it's also good to show this to researchers and community people, CSO workers who are in need of who are in need of practical research. As you've said, there's a lot of research that would talk about a lot about the semantics and other things. Well, it's okay, it's good, but for community people, I think what I've seen in your website would be interesting to know the different analysis of things at the perspective of the CSOs. Most likely would side on you would always have a side on these things, like um, who benefits from this research, just like in the manifesto. I've seen it also. And it will always be interesting to know for whom it is, because there's a lot of research going on, and usually it is driven by the donor who funded it. But now, little by little, I've also seen a lot of research, like, and also especially those who are the action research from the community, and then you ask what the community needs to know and needs to research on, that would be more interesting. And in Radix, you have this a lot of different point of view that can really help in real risk reduction, the sharing of ideas and the sharing of actual experiences can help the practitioners in doing their own solutions, and more so can also help in what to research on. Okay, I now we're involved in one research which is called ethical uh, the ethics of closing a project. It's with the university in Canada. We're in you talk on when the donor finish a humanitarian project, how do you close the project? It's just after you give all the relief, then you go out, or you also consider how it will really help the communities, and how it will like close it properly, and then make it into a transition of a ways forward, something like that. So that kind of research for me is very useful, and those things it's also good to see it in a blog, and people can relax and enjoy the research, not like the usual traditional research that you have. So Radix is really very radical, but at the same time very informative, and it can really give you a lot of color in understanding the things that you would want to learn. So just like what I've said in the ethical consideration of closing a project, there's a lot of what the community really wants about the project, and probably you would also see, oh, do you really need the project? uh, and sometimes, amazingly, we spend a lot of money on things that people really do not really like. So it's a good thing if we base a lot of our intervention with a good research, and then you make the research come from the community. So it's a very enlightening thing if we always involve the people we want to serve, or the people who want to benefit from the research at the first part of it, like in the conceptual, building the conceptual framework and things like that. So I think it's more of for me, and the reflection for Radix is more of like how can we use it for in our end as CSOs or NGOs in different countries, and also practitioners in DRR, as well as the most vulnerable in the communities. How can they use this, the information that they see here, how they can contribute, and how can they use it? The interaction would be very phenomenal if they can really have access to this. So that's why it's very good to see that you have also improved the website, and it becomes more interesting. Hopefully people can have more access to it and also contribute to it. So that's it for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mayforth, and it's great to have you here. So thank you for joining. I know that the internet connection was a little bit ungentle, and it's wonderful. Thank you for your intervention. Um, we gave up on attempting to share a song. We might try to do it later on. And I just want to remind the audience to please post the questions on Twitter, on Facebook, or on YouTube. We're monitoring social media, and we will have hopefully time for questions. And our next guest, I'm so excited to introduce you, Barefoot Bob. It's Bob Alexander. Oh, well, I think most of us know you as Barefoot Bob of BFB. Barefoot Bob is an independent researcher, trainer, consultant, and recording artist who has worked on participatory integrated studies, climate change, and development, vulnerability reduction, and resilience strengthening for over 25 years and all around the world. So BFB focuses on prospective risk-managed community development, community-based risk management, and community-based adaptation, livelihood, food, nutrition, and social service access, security, socioeconomic vulnerability, identification, analysis, assessment, and reduction, and of course, effective risk communication and community engagement approaches. BFB is currently in Malawi, but pre-COVID, I think you lived and worked pretty much in all of the most habitable regions of the world. And of course, I got to meet you in some of those regions, and we got to
That's true.
got to work together, which was great. So over to you.
All right, this is great. I'll start by saying thank you and happy International Day of Disaster Reduction, whatever part of that day you're in around the world. I think back as each of you took your trip down memory lane, and Ben is about to take his as well after me. 20 years ago, I was also a young graduate student, and I was actually an economist. I was a disaster risk reduction economist who was focusing almost exclusively on economic modeling for sustainable livelihoods in disaster-prone areas. And I found it was very difficult to have conversations with most people, because when I mentioned that I was studying the causes of disasters and the impacts and basically, what could be done to address them, people would stop me and say, "Oh, you do disaster relief." And they would put me into a box and expect me to stay in that box. So the email listservs that came in the 1990s were such a breath of fresh air of being able to find people who I could communicate. And then, of course, I found out about the papers and the books with Ben and others that helped say, yes, there's other people focusing on these types of things. And it came then that I'm thinking back to what Maureen was just saying about what's wrong with this picture. And I was thinking at that time, like, everything is wrong with this picture. It's all about everything that I was told it was about isn't about. It's about everything else, about what should be in the picture that we're talking about. So I came into Radix. At the time, I was in Bosnia, in post-war Bosnia, working on a whole bunch of different things related to the confluence of conflict and natural hazards and many different root causes of why people could not sustain development because of the different disruptions of access that they were having. And I was looking at this, and when Radix came out, I said, yes, this is the natural extension of the types of things. So even though I'd been a very, very one poor correspondent, as the songs say, about I've been a poor contributor at many times, but I love to contribute in bunches, and I'm very appreciative over the years of what's been there. As things have continued, since we're supposed to talk about the journey, just before Radix got launched, I got involved in a bunch of participatory projects, and I took me back, and it shook my head back to my sustainable development perspective, that the reason I got into this in the first place, and trying to figure out how to help people assess and solve their own problems rather than modeling for them from the outside. And as I guess as has been said about me, is that I'm naturally, you could call radical, I guess, in terms of not being employed by any university and not really by all. So I can be more free than others to be radical in some ways, and challenging the status quo in terms of publishing it in one thing, and trying to think of how can we best reach the local level decision makers. So I was looking at that, kind of like what Mayforth was just talking about in terms of the community-based approaches. And I realized at that point that community-based disaster risk management, community-based adaptation, risk communication, and community engagement really seemed to be my path. There were so many things that were lacking that could be done in those areas to try to, initially it was going in and trying to find out, trying to help people to help themselves to understand, to do better assessments, to integrate the different things across the different stakeholders across time. And then it moved more into the types of communication. And this is a lot of what I focus on now, but it's still trying to understand the integration of how do we make sure that the different people who are often neglected in the conventional ways of doing things are not neglected. And how do we make sure that things over time, so understanding assessment and decision-making through understanding the types of things that are not normally considered, and also looking at prospective risks, because so much is focused on the past conventionally, whereas we know that things are changing because of development, because of creeping environmental problems, including climate change. So how do we incorporate these things that a lot of people are not necessarily incorporating? But of course, I am still, as was mentioned, my focus on community-based risk management has moved a lot towards risk-managed community development, and a lot of that is on good practices communication. And one of the wonderful things is that technology has allowed a lot of things to evolve. That there's the possibilities of using different types of technologies to enable people to participate in the discussion and to participate in what's going on in not top-down communication, but hybrid models of figuring out co-created knowledge approaches to figuring out what can be done, and using songs, using videos, using lots of other things that people can actually produce them, not just be given them. So this has been fascinating for me over the last few years, and I'm, rather than being the passive occasional contributor, I'm dedicated now to the new Radix of, I've already said that I will be helping in the early goings. So at the end of this month, I will be hoping to encourage more people to get involved in contributing and discussing the different ways that we can use these different types of communication approaches and tools and methods in order to get people involved in the conversation. So be on the lookout on Radix. The end of this month, early next month, we will be looking at good practices communication and different ways of doing it. And I hope people will submit a bunch of different songs, videos, poems, anything, games, all kinds of different things that we can discuss and think about what's the best way to engage people, and are different ways to engage people, and how can we take this forward through Radix and as we continue discussing this further.
Thank you so much, BFB. It's great to see you on the stream. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
And before we go to our final guests, I just want to remind everybody to, if wherever you're tuning in from, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or wherever, you can drop any comments or questions into your comment bar, and it will come through to us, and we can bring it into the conversation in a few minutes. So our final guest for the day is Ben Wisner. And Ben, welcome to the stream. Ben is the second co-founder of Radix, joining us today. We're really glad to have you here. Ben has worked for 55 years on the use of village and neighborhood scale vernacular knowledge in resource and risk management. He also studies whether and how national and international policy and practice acknowledge, respect, and learn from villages and neighborhoods. His works include Power and Need in Africa, first published in 1988, At Risk, Natural Hazards, Peoples, Vulnerability and Disasters, 2 editions of which he co-authored, published in 94 and 2004, the Routledge Handbook of Natural Hazards and Disaster Reduction, which he co-edited and published in 2012, and Vulnerability as Concept, Model, Metric, and Tool, published in 2016. Ben, as always, it's just a pleasure to see you again, and we're looking forward to hearing your reflections on Radix.
All right, well, thank you very much. The private chat keeps sort of flipping up and distracting me and obliterating my right eye in the image I have of myself. So not to rant, to waste my 15 minutes ranting, but this technology leaves much to be desired. Anyway, to reflect on Radix, I really have to go back to 1965, when I wrote my master's thesis on the justifiability of civil disobedience. And that was at University of Chicago, and informed the Selective Service Administration in the US that I was a conscientious objector and I wouldn't, in fact, fight in the Vietnam War. So that meant alternative service, and I went off to Tanzania in '66 and lived in a cooperative Tanzanian or so-called Ujamaa village for 2 years. Now I mention that because what it underscores is my concern for quite a while in my adult life with issues of violence and of power. And in the particular case of the Vietnam War, I'm talking about hard power, that is violence, organized violence. And it was in Tanzania that I wrote in 1967, sitting in a Tanzanian village, something called Reflections of Vietnam in Tanzanian village daily life. And it seemed to me, sitting in Tanzania at that time, reflecting on Vietnam, that there really needed to be a total refusal, in Herbert Marcuse's sense of the great refusal, a total rethinking of the systems of exploitation and oppression that had brought this conflict to be. And everything I've seen since, as time has gone on, has reinforced that perception I had at the time. Although what's happened as I grew older and eventually met Maureen and we created Radix, is that my understanding of power became much more nuanced. It wasn't simply a hard power that needed to be contested, and but what one might call soft power. That is that people, the entire system is hegemonic in the sense that it influences what people take for granted, what people think of as common sense, what they believe, in short, so that one really had to question this notion that disasters were natural. But not only that, but other beliefs that people take for granted. Belief in development, belief in growth, belief in progress, belief actually in the normality of safety. And in order to encourage people to stop and think about those things, see them differently, and perhaps then organize with one another to act politically, as Maureen suggested, to change things, one needed to shock them, so that when a number of us, Phil O'Keefe, who sadly isn't with us any longer, Ken Westgate, who may be listening in from Australia, and Alex Baird, wrote a Bradford University occasional paper, and went on to write a paper in Nature and in Disaster, another one in Disasters, and declared that no disaster is natural. We were attempting to shock. It's a very it's a very extreme thing to say, and it causes people, or at least at the time, caused people some dismay. No, absolutely no disaster is natural. And I've actually, recently I've been involved in a correspondence about near-Earth object collisions, asteroids, for instance. I mean, can't we consider that, in fact, a natural disaster? I don't want to get into the details now, but I assert, in fact, even that is not natural. We could talk about that for some time. The point is that there are a number of beliefs that have to be contested, and my sense is that in a way, with the mainstreaming of this notion that vulnerability is key to understanding disaster, that's really gotten mainstreamed into the United Nations system and so on and so forth. But with that, what's happened is the shock value has been dissipated. And what I find with the new attractive, entertaining website, the new Radix, I have to say I don't know where the shock value is, and I leave that open for discussion. Don't we still need to shock people, wake them up, even before we can begin this participatory dialogue? The other thing I'd like to say about both the old Radix and the new Radix is that the radical solutions really weren't forthcoming. We had lots of radical interpretations of disaster, but no, as far as I'm concerned, really no radical solutions. Now, in part, that's a function of the sort of the great refusal, or there's a sort of juvenile component there that one just doesn't want to deal with it, so refuse it, set it aside. There have been many solutions proposed, but I think by radical solution, well, we haven't decided what a radical solution is. And what I've been discussing with JC a bit around the new website is it possible for a number of us to work together to come up with a system of assessing disaster risk reduction interventions, and in almost ranking them by the extent to which they simultaneously deal with the creation of risk. If changing land use in order to reduce the impact of sea level rise, for instance, is undoubtedly a necessary thing, a good thing perhaps, but does it simultaneously affect decision making and the allocation of people to places, the space economy, territorial management, and so forth? Does it actually affect those systems in such a way that it won't be necessary to take that kind of intervention later. So I leave those two thoughts out there as perhaps challenges to the new Radix going forward, to find a way to reclaim the power to shock, and also to develop some way of assessing so-called solutions in a way that actually winnows them through and comes up with those that we think are truly radical solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. As always, listening to you is always amazing, and thank you for joining us today. I love this, that that you're saying, like, reclaiming the power to shock, because we are very often scared of shocks, right? And we kind of try and maybe tiptoe around the problem a little bit too much. But I think you're rightly pointing out that tiptoeing doesn't work. So thank you. And we will reflect on this, I think, in questions and answers. And we will invite all our guests back on the screen now. Jason's just going to bring everybody up now. And we have a few questions that we'd like to ask. We don't have that much time. So we will probably perhaps go for about 10 minutes and just ask a few questions. But of course, we would like to continue this discussion offline as well. In the best traditions of Radix, it will go on. So, JC, do you want to start us with questions to keep you awake, to make sure that you're not sleeping?
Yeah, I'm kind of getting sleepy indeed. I think it's been great, and I've been learning a lot. I'd like to pick up on Ben's final point and the sort of shock effect. What do you think? And it's a question for all of you. The priorities and the key questions to address in the coming years and the coming decades should be for all of us, researchers and practitioners as well, because again, as Mayforth said, I mean, it's not only about researchers, it's about practitioners as well. Sorry, I didn't want to kill the momentum. Anyone?
If I may reflect a bit, JC.
Go for it, Rohit.
Okay, all right. No, well, my major concern, and I think it's just responding to what JC you posed, is that we are talking too big these days. We have got a lot of very nice words to play with. We kind of say many nice things, but what do we actually do? Translate them on the ground. So I think there needs to be a lot of bridging that requires to be done. While we definitely need to talk big and need to reflect on larger issues, how do those larger issues really translate into things at the local level? I think those reflections have to come out, because we are not still able to get them out, in the sense, to the wider world. And I feel that whether it is related to climate change, whether it is related to the ill-conceived development, we all know these issues. We all kind of we all crib about it, let's say, and we all know where the challenges lie. But we haven't really gone down and seen what is being done, how is it being done, and what needs to be done, but at the very small local ground level. I think those reflections, I feel that Radix has the capacity to bring them up, but of course it requires to move beyond the language barriers. No, so that is a huge challenge. So it doesn't go only limited to the English language speakers or the predominant language speakers, but it goes beyond those languages that are in the mainstream. Thanks.
Thanks, Rohit. Anyone else, or do you have any questions, Jason or Oksenia?
I had a thought after Ben was talking about the importance of maintaining the shock value, maintaining the radical, And I guess what we're always trying to do is to get more people to recognize the legitimacy of the radical argument, the radical case. But then you get what seems to happen is you then get locked into this process of appropriation. So the radical gets appropriated, and suddenly it actually kind of starts to mean something else. All the other terms, all the vulnerability, sustainability, resilience, they, as soon as they start to emerge into the mainstream, and there's a sense that, oh, well, there's some radical ideas are getting out there. They've become watered down, to put it politely, but appropriated and distorted, to put it more strongly and realistically, I think. So when it goes into the mainstream, can it remain radical?
Yeah.
Again, not another solution. No solution. Again, just throwing another problem out there.
Thanks, Maureen. And I want to pick up on that and kind of with the next question, really. In recent years, we've kind of seen proliferation of descriptions, I suppose, of kind of disaster studies, so radical, critical, innovative, you name it. Disaster studies have been it all. But really, I think that we are hopefully trying to achieve the same thing. So how do we move into the future in that, we're not perhaps branding ourselves, but are actually working in solidarity? Because, maybe solidarity is something we don't really talk about enough in disaster scholarship. And again, I'm just throwing it at all of you.
Can I also share a bit?
Please, Mayforth, yeah.
I just remembered when you talk about words and descriptive things, like, for example, the nexus of talking about sustainable development, the nexus of sustainable development, disaster risk reduction, and the Paris Agreement, all having the nexus of it, making a grand solution for really addressing the risk. But then again, as I've told you a while ago, my framework is more in the community. When you talk with the community, talking about sustainable development, disaster risk reduction, and things like that, they would just say, actually, our problem is we can no longer fish because the disasters they have extreme weather events that affects their livelihood, and having more effect in their when disaster comes to them, making them poorer and poorer and poorer. The thing is, sometimes all this language and the things that you've researched on, when you go to the community and the people that you want to really benefit from your research, is actually lost in translation, as I've seen also in one of those words. So it would be really very interesting to always have an involvement with them, and that's why I'm also trying to also look into how we can engage these users to the platform that you have, and that's it.
Thank you so much, Mayforth. Any other responses to this? Just jump in.
I mean, I can jump back in if just for the sake of keeping the ball rolling. But I agreed with Maureen's point about the proliferation of terms, adjectives, whatever new concepts, and to me, this is this is antithetical somehow with the shock effect that Ben was talking about, and many of you know my point about we all claim to be critical, and it was definitely critical in the 1970s, but with the proliferation of all these adjectives and terms and concepts, I don't think we're as critical as we claim to be. And the very fact that we all claim and we all come to agree that disasters are social constructs, but at the same time use all these concepts and terms and adjectives that we take for universal doesn't make any sense to me. This is an epistemological nonsense. We take things for universal and we apply them across very diverse cultures all around the world, but at the same time take this as a social construct. And that doesn't make sense to me. So the more things we attach to this core concept of disasters and roll them over the world in a blanket fashion, doesn't make sense. There's something wrong somewhere.
I agree with you, JC. I'm sorry to interrupt. Is it okay? I agree with you, JC. The thing is, maybe if people in the areas whom they experience a lot of disasters, they would definitely understand the shocking statements that Ben would say. There's no such thing as natural disasters. If they were given the whole story of it, then they would say, well, yes, actually, it's something like if we do something like this in our environment, it will go back to us, as simple as that in their culture, in whatever culture there is. So sometimes those shocking statements that we have, especially those who theorize a lot and everything, if we go back to those people who do practical things, then they also can give you a lot of shocking answers that are very practical and very usable.
If I may, because I from the beginning of this, I was trying to figure out. I liked Ben's question, of course. I love shocking. I love being shocked. But I was thinking in the question, who are we trying to shock? And it seems there's different audiences, and it seems that's coming out in our discussion as well. In terms of the people who are coming to the website, they're already in the choir. I'm not sure who the new members of the Radix website are, but I would believe that many of them are coming there for a reason. It's because they're already part of the shockies or the shockers. So I'm not sure much of what we're going to put there that's going to shake them out of that. I think we might be looking more to inspire, to think further along with where and to go further within that. So we haven't failed if we haven't shocked them, but we've done well to continue to inspire along those ways. If we're going along this thread of communities, then I liked what Mayforth was saying and others in terms of finding out what is it that's shocking. It's rather than us putting out something to them, we don't need to use our terminology, but we can find out from them what's shocking and what types of things we need to actually do the hybrid knowledge, the co-creation, understanding like what it is that's, different understandings, different perceptions that we can figure out together. So I think it's possible. Maybe we could use, since this is about Radix, that we could use the site, we could use Twitter to try to engage with people and find out more about what is shocking. And so in terms of that preaching to the choir, maybe that isn't accurate. Maybe we can actually be using that to find out from everybody and engage in that conversation is what is it that can we be doing maybe outside of this site in real life out there somewhere that can be shocking and actually inspiring at the same time.
Could I just clarify a little bit? There's a great deal of co-optation has taken place, and over the last 10 years, 20 years, and so that as JC and others have said, it's no longer controversy at all to assert that, say, marginal people tend to be allocated to marginal places in the space economy, or that no disaster is natural. These essential maxims, you might say, a sort of summary notions that represent the conclusions of the work that I've done over 50 odd years, no longer shocking. And so recently I wrote, recently I found that the UN DRR had done something on resilience that I found really, really troubling in this respect. You know, talk about, if you look at the notion of resilience and follow it through, it raises all sorts of questions about blaming the victim, about relieving the state of its responsibilities, and I pushed back against that in something that I wrote. I think those sorts of things ought to find a place on Radix. I think every time we find that the language is being corrupted, is being misused in this way, we have a responsibility to respond. Now, I suppose to put reflections of this kind on the website, yeah, that's not going to shock the particular people who were attracted to the website, and probably the notion of inspiring them is a better idea. But what I was reacting to, however, is the wholesale appropriation of a lot of these concepts and their dilution, so that the human consequences, the pain, the suffering, and indeed the shock of these situations is no longer on the surface. I guess that's what I was trying to get at. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ben. And I'm kind of, I guess all of us are hoping that perhaps Accord would somehow stimulate this further, you know, and help us to go back to these conversations and really reinvigorate them. And I absolutely hate to bring this to the close, but I am this person who will. And thank you so much for all your time. This has been fascinating. Wonderful discussion as always, and we're just so grateful for your time and for joining us today, and we always learn so much from you. If you're watching us live, don't leave just yet, because we have an amazing surprise for you installed. You know, it's International Day of Disaster Risk Reduction after all. So please follow Disasters Deconstructed on Twitter, Facebook, and wherever you're following us as a podcast. And don't forget, of course, to follow Radix. I also want to just note that we are inviting you to contribute to the creation of Radix logo. So if you have any artistic inclinations, please get in touch either with Jason and me, or with Radix email, which you can find on the website. And the winner will be decided by public vote and will receive a prize, which is a forthcoming book by J.C. Gayat, The Invention of Disasters, which is coming out later this year. Please join our upcoming live streams over the next couple of months. We have a Disasters Deconstructed book group in mid-November, where we will be discussing Darian's Choice, Development, Drowned and Reborn by Clyde Wood. We have a fantastic live stream coming up in January with Gonzalo Lizarralde and Samantha Montano to discuss their 2 new books on natural disasters and disasterology, respectively. And of course, enjoy the rest of season 5. We've just released the penultimate episode yesterday, and the final episode of season 5 is coming out on Monday 25th. And then we will take a little break to release season 6 in January. But of course, there will be Christmas special because I'm sure you all missed my terrible Christmas jokes. Anyway, and to finish this live stream, we could not ask BFB to perhaps do a little song for us. So over to you, BFB, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
We can't hear you, BFB. You're muted, I think.
Okay, is that better?
Oh, yeah, now we can hear
I
you.
would have
Perfect.
been terrible to sing a song without any microphone.
With the mute, yeah.
Although my mouth must look funny moving. All right. We had problems with the audio before, so why don't I give you a brief preview of the Accord song and then shift into the other one that was the requested one. For the Accord song, we've been talking about this for many months, and what I did was I just took the general ideas that we had discussed as the reason, and one of the main things was to make sure that local people, the focus is on locally driven agendas. What's the priorities of the people themselves, not the priorities of the outsiders, the external people. And similarly, one of the other things was about focusing on making sure that the local researchers are not taken advantage of, that it isn't people from the outside who are using them and taking credit for their work, but ensuring that somehow these questions are leading towards thinking through how to do both of those things in addition to some other things. So I just took the 49 questions or whatever there were and tried to lump them together as much as I could to make them fit into a song framework of 2 verses and a bridge. So this is just the chorus of how it goes. And the sing-along part is an accord. A way forward. An accord for disaster risk reduction studies moving toward. An accord for research that's driven locally to ensure. An accord, respect for local priorities, a way forward. An accord for disaster risk reduction studies. A way forward. An accord for disaster risk reduction studies moving forward. An accord to focus on better diversity to ensure. An accord that works for the credit for works given equitably. A way forward. An accord for disaster risk reduction studies. An accord. So that's the idea of that one. Now, the one that sums it all up. Oh, thank you. It's all about short and long-term access. It's about not forgetting that development is part of it and making sure that we make sure that the people who do not have access can get it, but then also making sure it's not disrupted. So this is the access, and this is access. Short and long-term access. Short and long-term access. Short and long-term. The first part is to overcome barriers not letting some people get needed levels of basic societal function and systematize these BSFs and processes and resources that allow them to assess what should be done to resist and respond to everyday risk from stress. So reliably, there'll be less disruption of access. For everyone, it's undeniable access. Everyday, sustained, reliable access. Through risk-managed development, optimizing risk to get livelihood and service needs met, evolving in adaptive ways, and thereby remaining viable for access. Short and long-term access. Short and long-term. What could be causing changes in the rare extremes, with process contingencies, early surge capacities, and livelihood and basic social service strategies to to resist and respond to the shock so we can minimize the disruption, vulnerability, access. Everyone, it's undeniable access. Everyday sustained reliable access. Through risk management development, optimizing risk to get livelihood and service needs met, evolving in adaptive ways, and thereby remaining viable for access. Short and long term. Having it and keeping it's what risk managed development's about. By deciding and prioritizing what should be the best action route for mitigating and preparing to minimize people going without. If you think this is important, why don't you join with me and shout about access. For everyone, it's undeniable access. Everyday sustained reliable access. Through risk managed development, optimizing risk to get livelihood and service needs met, evolving in adaptive ways, and thereby remaining viable for access. Short and long-term access. Short and long-term access. Short and long-term access. Thanks very much.
Thank
Amazing,
you.
Yossi.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, BFB.